All right, we're live. Brutal Planet, greetings. We're live today with Johnny Kelly, former drummer of Typo Negative. And man, you're like drummer for hire. You've been in a bunch of bands.
Yeah, I get around a bit.
Yeah, hey, keep playing,
Yeah.
man. That's
Well,
that's the
it's what I love doing. So
yeah, that's it's badass, man. So,
no, thank you.
last time we were supposed to talk to you before, but you had a problem with your dog, and the dog's
Oh,
okay. The dog pulled
yeah,
through.
Charlie's doing very well now. Actually, he's doing really well.
Awesome.
Thankfully, yeah, I had taken him to the vet for an X-ray, and I let him out into the yard to go to the bathroom after we got back. I let him out in the yard, and then I came upstairs to go do interviews. And I came down after one of the interviews and I'm like, where's Charlie? And I like, my wife works from home and I'm asking her, I was like, is Charlie in there with you? And she was like, no. We ran out into the yard and we found him. He was like laying down on his side and he was panting and, gasping. He was in heat stroke.
Oh,
So then we had to run him to the emergency vet and like they were able to save him. And that was, now he's doing great. Before that, he's a Chihuahua and
I was gonna ask you.
he has heart disease. So
Oh,
he's been like throwing up a lot of bile. He's been coughing a lot, and so that's why I brought him to the vet the first time to get X-rays for that. And anyway, so they put him on a new medication, and he's doing great. He hasn't coughed at all in days and stuff. He's doing really well. He's recovered from the heat stroke. So I got really lucky with that. I almost
you,
killed my
you,
cat yesterday, though.
no. Oh
Doing
no,
the
you guys
same
got a
thing.
lot of animals, huh?
Yeah, there's 8 dogs in the house and 2 cats.
Wow.
My wife is involved with a dog rescue. It's
Awesome.
called Rescue Row. RescueRowInc.org is the website if anyone's interested. And so anyway, we foster a few dogs and a couple of them
Wait,
we've kept.
spell that real quick. Rescue, RASQUEROW, row.com. Okay. Yeah.
RescueRowInc.org.
I'm
Yeah.
sure we got a lot of people that are interested in that kind of stuff. We talked to Mixie a couple weeks ago from Stitched Apart, and she does like a thing with cats, like where she nurses like baby kitties and stuff, and she's a
Okay,
total
yeah.
animal person too. A lot of animal people, I think, in the music world.
Well, it's something that my wife wanted to do, and she got involved in it, and so I guess I didn't really have a choice.
But you
But
clearly love the
I
animal.
enjoy it. I try to help out. I try to help them. I help them. Fundraise and stuff like that, and I help take care of the dogs when they're here in the house. And it's fun. It can get a little hairy at times. When you have so many dogs. Like when the doorbell rings, it's
Yeah, it's like the
pretty
pack
chaotic.
answers the door.
Yeah, like, and it always happens, like when you're on an important phone call or something like that.
Right.
You're doing something
I
really
always
important.
I always make
Yeah.
that joke. I have like gardeners that show up with leaf blowers whenever we go on live stream. It's like never fails. Like as soon as live stream starts, like, oh, here they come.
Yeah.
So is he an
Anyway,
older dog?
that's. I'm sorry.
Is he an older dog?
Charlie's like they estimate him to be around like 10 or 11 years old. So I guess anywhere
Okay.
between like 10 and 12. But
Those
most of the
swallows are
dogs here are seniors. My wife likes to take the dogs that are old and have medical issues and stuff. She likes bringing them in, fostering them because they're harder to find homes for.
Yeah.
Everybody wants puppies, so it's
Yep.
so it's easy to rehome a puppy, but to find a like a Shih Tzu that can't see or hear and is 15, 16 years old.
Yeah, that's a little tougher. 3-legged dogs and stuff like that.
Yeah, but there are people out there that are more than happy to take a dog like that into their home and adopt them. 'Cause
Totally.
we've had many like that. And we've Bernadette's been able to find homes for them and stuff. It's great.
Out here in California, it's very popular. I used to work for a guy actually in the Valley, and his wife ran a thing called Pooch Heaven, where they would go
Uh,
to they would go around to the shelters and adopt the dogs that were about to be euthanized. And this guy had like a ranch out in Pasadena, like a huge ranch. He had like 300 dogs or something crazy like
mhm.
that.
So that's kind of like what they do here, like the shelters and stuff. They'll, when certain dogs come into the shelter, they'll contact my wife and see if their rescue can, take them in instead of them, wind up being euthanized and stuff.
Yeah,
Because
that's
all the
really
shelters down here in Dallas and Fort Worth, they're all overrun right now. There's so many dogs in them. It's
we
hard for
just
them to take everything.
we just had this conversation about people are always pointing at California, like because of the homeless problem, and I'm just like, look, California has a lot of homeless people. Yes, it's warm here, but I think it's just as bad in cities like Austin and Dallas. It's just if you
Dallas, not
adjust
so
the
much
population
as it is, from what I understand. Austin's pretty
in
tough.
Austin.
They have a big problem with that. Plus there's also like the migrant issue.
Yeah.
This is their first stop. So
Yep.
there's a lot of resources are getting used and things like that. Obviously it's a big political hotbed topic, but
Yeah.
in the real world, like this is where they come first, and there's a lot of them coming through.
Sure.
So they so that's been a strain on things too, and dogs become low on the priority list of priorities.
Sure.
So
Well, let's talk music, man. Let's switch gears to music. So, let's go. Let's start at the beginning. What are some of the bands and drummers that influenced you? Like, who are some of your heroes as far as drummers go? I'm curious
for
to know.
me, I guess like the first. The first one was, Peter Criss, like everybody else that were kids in the 70s.
Peter Criss.
My dad brought home Kiss Alive, and that changed everything. And before that, there was always music in the house. My parents didn't play any instruments, but a lot of people in my family did. On my mother's side, there's a lot of guitar players, piano players, and so. But
Did
my
you grow
dad
up in
was
Brooklyn?
Yeah, I did. I grew up in Flatbush. I was born in Ridgewood, and then we moved to Flatbush when I was like, I don't know, like 3 years old, something like that. And my father was a big Stones fan, Beatles fan, Bowie, Rod Stewart, so. As kids, my brother and I, we were indoctrinated on that stuff. Like the Stones and Beatles. Those were my nursery records. I didn't have, we weren't like listening to like Disney records or Mary Had a Little Lamb. We were listening to Beggar's Banquet and Sergeant Pepper's and Let It Bleed, and Sticky Fingers. One of my earliest memories was when my brother and I were only 11 months apart, so we're Irish twins. And so when we were very small, they had a big, like a carriage, not a stroller, but a carriage. And they would sit us in the carriage facing each other, my brother and I. And I have one of my earliest memories is holding Sticky Fingers in the carriage. So like when my dad had just bought it. So like whatever, 1971, I'm like, whatever, like
Wow.
3 years old. Yeah. And I remember holding Sticky Fingers, and so I was always, listening to my dad's records and stuff. And so I got, was into a lot of like classic rock. And then, and of course Kiss. And then from there, then it, went into, discovered Led Zeppelin, and then I discovered Black Sabbath. And then started getting into like more metal, finding my own way, Metallica, Motley Crue, Wasp, Accept, Saxon. I was a big Saxon fan when I was in high school. Overkill. Me and Kenny went to go see Overkill. I don't know how many times we saw Overkill. Before the 80s were over, it was like every time they played, we always went. And
they were like the East Coast kind of thrash, like them and Anthrax. Like out here, we had Metallica and Megadeth.
Right. Yeah, and
You guys had Testament or not Testament, Overkill and Anthrax.
Yeah, I remember seeing Anthrax. I saw Anthrax in the clubs a couple of times. Before they got bigger, where they couldn't play. They couldn't play Lamar anymore. But yeah, a lot of that stuff I was into a lot of that. I loved Celtic Frost and Venom. Getting into stuff like that. That was really cool. It was different. Slayer. Like you guys had Slayer in California.
Yeah. I mean, obviously one of the big four.
Yeah.
Thrash bands too.
And,
we also Suicidal Tendencies, I don't think gets enough credit. I was watching a thing with them the other day where Mike Muir is like when he was a kid talking about them being censored because of their name, because the people like some stores wouldn't carry their CDs because they were called Suicidal Tendencies. And he actually mentioned, with Anthrax, like they couldn't. I was like, Anthrax is kind of a little bit of an edgy name too. So anyway.
Well, nobody thought anything of it, back then,
Right.
Then it became, like a thing to send it in the mail. Then it was an issue.
I clearly remember Scott Ian coming out after that because people were trying to like, oh no, are you going to change your name? And he's like, no, we're not going to change our name to Basket of Puppies.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But I guess being a teenager in the 80s, it was pretty exciting. There were a lot of things to to discover, and it was a lot of it was all pretty new, and you basically found your own way from that. And then after the 80s were over, then I went back into classic rock again. I started like Appetite for Destruction was one of the game changer records. I got into that, and that changed a lot for me. That was a big influence on my trajectory. And then I was even playing like classic rock bands type stuff, more along the lines of like Aerosmith and Skinner and things like that, or and then joined Type O. I mean, I always loved Type O, going
so
back.
How did you meet the guys from Type O? Like tell that story.
I knew all of them for years.
Okay.
For years before Type O was even Type O. We were friends. We all come from the same neighborhood. Kenny and I had played in a band together for years before he joined Type O.
Okay.
And I knew Sal. I met Sal. He was like 13 years old when I met him. I must have been like 15, something like that. I couldn't have been no older than 15. And Josh had a recording studio in his house, so all the local bands were going to his house to make demos. So that's how Kenny and I met Josh at the same time, going there to record.
Okay.
So, and I used to.
You guys were in a band before Type O together.
Yeah. And
what was it called?
Hellraiser.
Hellraiser.
So, speed metal, thrash metal.
I like it.
Yeah. And we basically kind of like learned how to play together. I learned all the things wrong, and then had to we did all these things wrong, and then we had to learn how to do them right. And, but it was fun. And then everybody used to go to Josh's house to make demos. And that's how I met Josh. I went there with a few bands to record. So I knew Josh and Peter, I used to work in the rehearsal studio where all these bands used to rehearse. I used to work there, and Peter would go there with Carnivore and stuff. And so then I got to meet, got to know Peter. Peter was kind of like, like the local rock star, the neighborhood rock star.
Okay.
Because of Carnivore and stuff, and in all the bands that we all the the younger kids, they were all like into Carnivore.
Sure.
And then going from there, I worked for the band a couple of times, went on a couple of trips with them and stuff, where they needed a driver, and we drove like cross country, and it was a great time. It was a lot of fun. And not long after that, like whatever year or two later, like Sal had left the band, and then I wanted to audition. And at the time, nobody, everything was up in the air because Sal left the band. They weren't sure if the band was going to break up or if they were going to keep going. Nobody really knew, because the band wasn't really doing anything. They had records out, like the Bloody Kisses had just been released, but I remember Peter coming to my job. He used to come to my shop where I used to work, and he used to hang out with me and my boss. And before I auditioned, he was, telling me, he's like, look, this isn't what if you're expecting to like, go on tour and stuff like that, this isn't what we're going to be doing. And I told him, I said, honestly, I said, I don't care whether we, go on tour, if we play once a year. It's like, I don't give a shit. I was like, I just want to be in the band.
Yeah.
So whatever we do, I don't care. And then before my audition, and honestly, I don't even know how many people they auditioned, besides me.
Seems like you were the natural.
I have no idea. But before my audition, Kenny and I would go to the studio and rehearse the set so that he would help me, he's helping me get up to speed so that I would get the audition.
Yeah, yeah.
And I did. I wound up getting the audition, and then, I guess 2023.
I feel like with bands like that too, it's more about the personalities and how you mesh with the other band members than anything.
It is, like being in a band is like, it really is such having, ability to play is such a small, factor. I mean, obviously you need to play a little bit. You don't have to be the greatest player, but you need to play a little bit. And the other 90% is, how do you get along with these other people, especially when you're touring?
Yeah.
Now you're trapped in a vehicle, whether it's a van or a bus or whatever, you're with them for weeks on end. So they're like, they're your family, they're your friends, they're your coworkers, they're all these things, with the same group of people. It's not like you wake up in the morning, say hello to your wife and kids, and then you go off to work and you hang out with those people. And then after work, you come home, you see your family, or maybe you go out with your buddies, afterwards.
Yeah.
When you're in a band and you're in a touring band, those same people are all of that.
Yeah.
So
you wake up next to your stinky bass player.
Yeah. And, but at the same time, like you get those quirks where like, you'll get annoyed at somebody. They didn't, they left the window open, like they left the curtain open or some kind of shit like that. And he keeps doing that, like leaving the cap off on the toothpaste.
It's like being married in a lot of ways.
It is. It's like being married to, like whatever, 4 or 5 people.
Multiple people. Yeah.
And, so, like being able to, function with others is really important. Like to get along, you have to be able to get along with people.
So how long with Type O were you in the band before things really started to take off?
I don't know, 5 months, 6 months. Well, things take off. Totally different.
Yeah.
Well,
before you guys go on like the cruise tour.
That was I joined in the fall of '93, and that was the summer of '94. So I was in the band almost a year when we went on tour with Motley Crue, and we were, we had done a couple of club tours. The first tour I did with the band was in a club tour. We did that. We went out for like 6 weeks or whatever, and then came home, went back to work, and then we got the 2 weeks of dates with 9 Inch Nails, and then we went back out, and then we came home, and then it was, the way it was like, back then you really weren't looking that far into the future. You were just going away for a couple of weeks, and you come home, and I go back to, turning wrenches, working on cars. And then it kept on, like, it would just, something would come up afterwards. You get home, get back into the swing of working and, whatever, civilian life.
That's a good way to put it.
And then you would, our manager would call and say, hey, we got this. Can you get off work? And it's like, let me see what I can do, whatever. And so you never really looked that far ahead because there wasn't really a future to look towards. Because the band at this point, we weren't getting any radio play. We weren't, our videos really weren't being played on MTV. We really didn't have any kind of reach, and we had a very small fan base, and so you didn't really think that anything else was going to come of it. You're worried about. I spent a lot of it worried about losing my job. Like, what am I going to do when I get home? Because we weren't making any money on the road, so. We were out there playing every night, but we weren't really coming home with any money. And I was like, what am I going to do? I hope I have a job when I get back from this.
Yeah. Well, if you're a mechanic, that's there's usually a need for that.
Yeah, like yeah,
Not too hard, but still.
But it just seemed like, back then it just seemed, at the time it seemed like, like terrifying to have to try to find another job because
Right. I mean, it's got to be tough to swing back and forth from that. Absolutely.
Yeah, at first, I remember my boss was pretty supportive of it. He's like, "Oh, that's awesome. Whatever. You're going to go away. Go ahead, take some time off." But it was a one-man shop, so when I was out, the shop was closed. It was I worked at like a Pep Boys, but it was one garage at Pep Boys. So like you bought stuff like you would at like Pep Boys or whatever AutoZone and
yeah, like an air filter or something.
Right. If you wanted something, you wanted it put on your car right then and there, I was the guy. So if I wasn't there, there was nobody to do this stuff. So they were cool about it the first couple of times I went away. And then I wound up quitting when we were on tour with Motley Crue because I knew that I was going to be gone like the entire summer. And so
yeah,
I was like, all right, whatever, find somebody to replace me and cross that bridge when I get back. And then it just kept on, just stayed on the bus,
rolling from there.
Going, yeah.
Kenny had said that Motley Crue was the tour that broke you guys. Really, he felt like Motley Crue is the band that kind of like put you guys at the level.
Yeah, but they opened the door for us. I don't think they put us on a level.
Yeah,
but
they exposed you to a bigger audience.
Yes,
basically.
Yeah, and at first I was terrified because when I was, when my manager was telling us, you guys going to go out with Motley Crue this summer, it was like, why would we go out with Motley Crue? I was like, I have a pretty healthy sense of humor. I was like, I'm failing to see the punchline in this. And he was just like,
it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I was just like, they're just going to throw shit at us. They're just going to throw things at us, for 30 minutes. I was like, they're going to hate us. We don't work with that. And he was convinced us. He was like, this is going to be a really, really good thing for you guys. He's like, trust me on this. And it's like, okay, yeah, sure. Going to go on tour at Motley Crue. I mean, I liked Motley Crue. So I was like, that'd be cool. I get to watch Tommy Lee play every night. So, that's what I'm going to do this summer. And it wound up, the tour wasn't successful for them. But, what isn't successful for them was over the moon for us. Because, we could go to, to Charlotte or, wherever with Jacksonville, we're not going to play in front of anybody. We're going to play in front of like 12 people. That's what would happen when we would go down south. But then, playing with Motley Crue, I mean, it was, we're playing like these big, amphitheaters and, these sheds and stuff. And there really isn't a lot of people there. There's, a few thousand, but a few thousand for Type O Negative is huge.
Yeah.
Like it's bad for them. It's a bad optic for, for Motley Crue, but for Type O, it was great.
It was massive.
And, our manager at the time, he was, the minute we finished touring with Motley Crue, put us on a club tour going back to all these places that we played. And there were people at the clubs. And then that's what kind of started it. Like I remember we were playing the Basement. The Basement was in Dallas, was the first show after we finished with Motley Crue. And we weren't really sure, what to expect. And the Basement was sold out. And I remember looking out the bus window and seeing a line going all the way up the block and around the corner. People that had to get turned away.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, holy shit. I was like, wow. And then, so, yeah, they definitely gave us that start for sure. Beavis and Butthead really broke it open for us.
Yeah, it's crazy how many bands they did.
Yeah.
Type O was like the band that kind of didn't fit too. So because like you talked about 9 Inch Nails, I saw Kenny talking about that, and he said that 9 Inch Nails fans didn't like you guys, and that surprised me.
Not at all. Like they disliked us so much, they wouldn't even boo. They did absolutely nothing, no reaction at all. Thank God it was only 12 shows.
Yeah.
Because that was tough.
And I feel like that kind of audience, like an unreceptive audience, is almost you guys' like bag. It's like Oh, like
Yeah, I
after
mean,
listening
like,
to Origin of Feces, I always love that. It's just like,
it gave Peter an opportunity to work on his stand up a little bit.
yeah, it's like
Like
it's almost like
somebody, I remember, like, somebody said somebody threw something on stage, and Peter was like, well, if you're going to throw anything, throw money. You know? And it started raining change on the stage when
people
we were
start throwing
playing.
change. Oh my god.
Fuck you.
And Nine Inch Nails fans are more closed-minded than Motley Crue fans.
Yeah.
Who
But that was also another thing, like between Nine Inch Nails and Motley Crue, our manager, we booked a tour and we went out. We went back like with Motley Crue, but we did it first with Nine Inch Nails. We played those shows with Nine Inch Nails and then went right back to the West Coast on our own, playing, doing our own club dates. And there were people there, and a lot of people were like, we saw you open up for Nine Inch Nails.
okay.
Oh, okay. So did you throw anything at us?
Yeah, I don't know what it.
But it was just, I guess, like when Nine Inch Nails fans, they're there to see Nine Inch Nails. They're not interested in anything else, other than Nine Inch Nails. And but they remembered. Some of them remembered and did come to see us, and then so that's what we that was the things that helped us along the way. But the record really didn't break until the end of the year.
Okay.
Like when we were on tour with like Danzig, it was doing well. And then after the holidays, and then we went out in the beginning of '95. We went out with Pantera.
That's when I saw you guys.
We went out with them we were with them for like 3 months. And that was, I would say that was like, like the peak, the height of the band's popularity at that time. Same thing with Pantera too. Like both bands were really on a high, and it was, the shows were incredible.
I have like such a clear memory of the visual aspect of you guys when I saw you guys in Salt Lake City. Just it had like the purple light and everything. I was just like, this is so cool. And I had heard you guys before, but it again, it was one of those things where it just didn't make sense, but it worked so well. It worked so well. And Pantera was,
a lot of things didn't make sense. You just keep going. It didn't matter. But plenty of things that didn't make sense. Like starting with going out with Motley Crue. So like after that, it was like anything can happen. You weren't really surprised by anything. But it did, like, but at those points, like like the band really wasn't. I don't want to say successful, because we weren't. We were touring a lot, but we weren't. I mean, we were barely making a living.
Yeah.
And, but we were touring as much as possible. On Bloody Kisses, we toured for that record. We toured on it for 1.5 years. That's a long time. And it was, like in between breaks, like we would have, like when we were out with Queensryche, we did the summer of like '95. We were out like back then. It was like you would do like months with the band. You wouldn't just like do like 3 weeks or whatever. Like when you're out of support act, these bands like you wind up staying with them for a good chunk of their touring cycle. And we were out with Motley Crue, and when we were out with Queensryche took a 2-week break. A lot of these bands did. They would take like a 2-week break. Like the Motley did it, Pantera did it, Queensryche did it. And when Queensryche did it, like we would stay out. We would stay on the road and just keep playing. And like with Queensryche, we went to Europe for 2 weeks. Played a couple of festivals. We played Dynamo and stuff, and then came back and caught up. We caught back up with Queensryche, and then we'd stay out. And at the end of Queensryche, I remember like we were pretty burnt out at that point. Like we were burnt out when we were on tour with Queensryche. We didn't want to do it. But our manager was like, you guys are doing it. You're going out. And they like we turned it down a few times, and then they kept on throwing more money at us. Because now the band had a little bit of value. Like we were selling a lot of records. Like the band had value to it, so they wanted us to be on the tour. Yeah. And at the time, we were kind of like, oh man, just want to go home. We've been out a long time. Want to work on do a new record, and we wound up doing the tour, and then we went to Europe, and then we came home. So then we finally finished with the touring with Bloody Kisses, and we wound up at, like, the record was certified gold. And that's the, like when it was getting closer and stuff like that, then the record label, everybody was on board to try to get that first gold record for Roadrunner. And
were you guys the first gold record for Roadrunner?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. We were big fish, small pond. But so it was a new thing for them too. They weren't, used to having, one of the acts on their roster having that kind of success. So, it was new for us, new for them, it was new for everybody. And then it was getting close. And then the head of the label was like, we got to get a gold record out of this. And
did you play on that Roadrunner All-Stars record?
Yes.
I thought you did.
Yeah.
That is so cool. There's some great stuff on that.
The three of us played on it except for Kenny, Peter, and Josh, and me. I did a song with Matt Heafy
from Trivium.
Yeah, like his team. I did one song. And,
so I watched a documentary on it. I had heard the music, but I didn't know the story behind it. How they had like team captains and stuff, and that was so. Yeah. It's such a cool concept, and there's some great music on there.
Yeah, it was pretty. I thought the idea. I thought it was really interesting. Like it was. It was never done before, so that was cool. It was cool. Like like where they were like going really deep into the label's history. Like like pulling King Diamond out for a song. And,
yeah.
Some of those older bands. The Road Racer bands.
Well, and if you guys are their first gold record, I mean, you guys helped establish that.
Yeah, we helped them, like it was a we helped them, get on the map where they were now, like, they were one of the players, they were a really big independent label, and because they were still an independent, this was before they went to Universal, and this was they had they had a small office in Manhattan. It was. And from there, we did, we had the gold record, right? All the touring was done for Bloody Kisses. And then we were only home for 6 months. We did, wrote and recorded October Rust. Everything was done within 6 months. And then we were back on the road.
I was telling Kenny maybe we should next year or something. We should do an October Rust anniversary where we get you guys to come in and talk about the making of that record.
That's what this year was 27 years.
Yeah, because it was August. All you guys' stuff comes out in August for some reason.
I don't know. Like some of it came out in March. We've had some September releases. But those two, Bloody Kisses and October Rust, they both came out. They came out in August, in the summer. And we were right back out on the road. I mean, the record literally wasn't finished, and we were like, the bus had pulled up to the recording studio, and we emptied out all the gear and put it on the bus and left. And Josh would. This was before the internet. Josh would be on the phone in hotel rooms, talking to the engineer, telling him what to do, and giving him instructions on what to do while we were gone. And,
do you guys still? Someone in the comments said something about Josh. Do you and Kenny still hang out with Josh every once in a while? Do you guys get together at all?
Well, I live in Texas now, so I don't really hang out with those guys much. Kenny and Josh are related, like their wives.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
So they're in-laws, so they see each other pretty often, or at least like sees Josh's kids and stuff. But we're all in touch with each other, a lot of texting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Josh is just over it. He's like, I'm done with that whole world.
Pretty much, yeah. Like, but once Peter died, that was it for him. And and if Josh, you're not really surprised by that, because that's how he was with anything. Anything that took his interest, he would just be completely consumed with it 110%. So the same thing, like when Typo Negative was active and stuff like that. He was, 100%, all about that. And then he took an interest in, being a paramedic. And then he started going to school for it, and he was studying, and that's why he didn't do the last tour with us. Nobody knew that it was going to be the last tour, but he couldn't take off from school. He was like, if I go away for those couple of weeks or whatever, it wasn't a big tour. It was just one of the Halloween runs that we would do.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, can it wait until March when I finish school? And Peter and Kenny were like, no, if you need the money, we got to go out. We're going out in October. And remember talking to my manager, because he was basically, Josh was saying, he goes, look, if I take off those 2 weeks, I'm going to have to repeat the whole year again. He goes, I'm going to fail the class and I'm going to have to repeat it. So I'm not doing that. And so it became like whatever, like a standoff. And I remember talking to our manager at the time, right, Mike Renaud. I was like, what do you think of this? He goes, he's bluffing. He goes, when he sees the tour dates announced, he'll be there. I was like, I don't know, man. The tour dates got announced, and Josh is like, he goes, I told you guys, I'm not doing it. And then I remember talking with the guys. What are we going to do? We need a keyboard player. It's pretty important in type O.
Yeah,
it's a pretty important part of what we do. And Peter just, matter of fact, very nonchalant. He goes, Johnny knows a lot of people. Johnny, you go find a keyboard player. I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me.
Well, it's my problem now.
Yeah. Just here you go. This is your problem now. You'll take care of it. And I wound up finding, through some friends, I wound up finding Scott Warner, which was great, but it was it's not Josh. And we found, even when we got him, we still like thinking Josh ain't gonna let this happen. He's gonna be there, and he didn't show up.
Wow, he's busy picking up bodies in New York.
Yeah, he was doing his thing, and even before that, like before Peter passed away, like the last tours that we were doing and stuff, we were just like, I was like, this is going to be it for Josh. Josh is never getting on a bus again. He's going to be like, he wanted. I was just figuring that he would want to be like Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, work on the records, like be a part, do the creative thing, and then somebody else will go out and perform it every night live.
I mean,
because he didn't want to leave the band, but he didn't want to leave Brooklyn either. He didn't want to get on that bus with us anymore.
Yeah, I imagine for some people you get to a point where you're just like, I'm done with this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like that's that could go for anything, I guess. Anything in life. You just fuck this. I'm over it.
Well, do you have a hard stop at 5 or at your time?
Oh, no.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about post Typo Negative Johnny Kelly career. So after Typo Negative's done, I read that you played with Black Label Society for a minute too, like they just filled in.
Yeah, I did a tour with them in Europe. I covered for when Will Hunt was in the band.
Yes, you've been in so much stuff.
He was out with Black Label, and then he got called back to Evanescence, and he had to go back. So then he called me asking if I could cover, if I could finish the tour with them. And at the time, I really wasn't familiar with Black Label's music or anything. I really didn't,
Yeah.
And I just, I was in my car when he called me, and I was like, I was like, send me a set list. And I wound up buying all, the whole catalog and on iTunes and stuff. And, he sent me some recordings of rehearsals of like, how they were performing the stuff live and things like that. And then a few days later, I was on a plane to London, and Will hadn't gone back to the States yet. He hadn't gone back to Evanescence. So I stayed I watched him do like 2 shows, something like that. And then I would work with the band at like sound checks. Like, like they would do they would do their sound check. And then when they get everything dialed in, I would get behind the kit and, play with the other guys for, a few minutes, try to work on a couple of things. And Will was like, he was like, oh, just, you're fine. And jumped on a plane and left.
Just like, here you go.
Yeah. And then my first time playing with Zach was in front of like 3,000 people in Paris.
Oh, wow.
Because he wasn't there for sound checks. I was working with the rest of the band. So I remember them telling me, they were like, just a heads up, Zach is really loud on stage. So he's like, so they're like, just, you just be aware. And it was like, all right, cool, good to know. And we started playing, and the first thing I asked, I was like, I need more Zach.
Like, that's not loud enough.
I did. I had a hard time hearing the guitar, but it was like, like when they were saying that he's really loud, I'm thinking like Peter and Josh really loud. Those guys were really fucking loud. The loudest people I've ever played with. Really, hands down, the loudest.
That's a Brooklyn thing.
Either that or it's a hard of hearing thing or something. Josh like basically, like most keyboard players, they play direct. They just, do a couple of direct lines, from the, into the PA, and then just have a couple of monitors for their own sound, to hear back. Josh had his own fucking PA. And because the way that the way our stage setup was, I was facing the audience, and then Josh was on another riser, but he would face me. So he was facing me, and all of his gear was behind him. So it was all like coming at my head this way. So then he would do like these special effects, like these things, jackhammers and these helicopters and stuff. I felt like I was in a war. And sometimes it would be so loud, like, when something's so loud and it, like you start losing your balance.
It like hurts.
Yeah. That's what would happen. My eyes would like, roll in the back of my head. I'm like, what was that? And Peter would usually be pretty far away, and he was the loudest thing on stage, and everybody was trying to compete because Peter was so loud on stage. Everybody would try to compete with that just to hear themselves. And like every sound man that we had, they always yelled at us, and they were like, "You guys got to turn low." It's like, we don't have enough PA to compete with that. You got to turn down. And okay, all right, yeah, sorry, And then the minute we'd walk out on stage, you'd see Peter, and he would just like roll all the knobs, just roll them, just everything turned up. It's like, why did we even do sound check? And then but that's what it was. Everybody was like, just trying to compete just to be heard. And then I had to hit harder and, like louder just to hear my drums. I couldn't, I don't have amps. I can't compete with that. And so, like after, post typo negative, everything has been, relatively mild as far as,
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So
later on, I moved on to in-ear monitors, which I should have done with Type O.
That way better.
That would have changed everything.
What was your first gig post Type O?
I played with Danzig at U-Fest in Phoenix.
Did you guys tour with Danzig, or did you just play some one-off shows?
We did a tour with Danzig in 94, like the end of 94. He was touring on the 4 record.
Okay.
And we did a couple of months with him.
That's a good one.
Like from like Halloween to like Christmas.
I've heard a lot of people say that. Who was talking about him? Someone was saying that they learned a lot from Danzig as a businessman. I'm trying to remember who it was, because they were just like, he has a really good tour. I think it was Tommy Victor from Prong. Maybe not.
Like now, like now for him, he's finally getting his due with the Misfits and stuff. And that's those shows. I'd imagine they pay pretty well.
Yeah.
You know, like before that, you know, like the Misfits, when they were active, you know, like before they broke up in '83, the most they had ever made at a show was like $3,000.
Yeah.
So, you know, so now they're, you know, like, you know, their legacy and everything, you know, like it's, you know, they're finally, you know, reaping, you know, the rewards from it, you know.
Yeah. From
40
being
years,
a
40 years later.
legendary punk band.
Yeah.
Well, I even remember with Danzig, I saw Rick Rubin talking about, because Rick Rubin worked with like rap artists and stuff, and then
Yeah.
he switched over to like Slayer and Danzig, and I thought it was cool what he said. He's like, I wanted to work with music that was challenging, and I was like, that is a really cool way to look at things, because those albums, like Danzig 3 and 4, and like some of the early Slayer stuff, are like landmark albums.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you know, you know, like when we've auditioned, you know, like with Danzig, you know, like we audition guitar players and stuff like that. And a lot of people, they come in and they would take it for granted because it sounds so simple.
Yeah.
And it's not, you know, like, you know, like, yeah, this chord, you know, the chord progressions or whatever, the song structures may be, you know, simple, but to play it well is not simple. It's, you know, and these people, like, you know, a lot of them, I just watch them crumble, and it was great. It was, you know, pretty entertaining, you know, like, you know, watching these people, oh yeah, you know, like I did this and that, you know, all the shit talking and stuff like that. All right, you know, how about, you know, let's play a song, and you just watch them.
That's crazy, because the song Mother sounds like a pretty simple song, for example, but it's really not. Like some of the rhythm changes and the rhythmic elements of the riff and stuff.
Yeah, right. To like, you know, like to get into the dynamics of the song itself, you know, that's where the skill is. It's not, you know, like the whatever, you know, the G, A, and D, or
sure,
you know, whatever it is, you know, it's not that. You know, it's playing it the right way to, you know, to create the atmosphere that, you know, that the song has. You know, that's the part that makes it iconic, you know. And if you don't do that part right, you know, then it's, you know, it's a shitty song. You know, like but played poorly. Then it doesn't matter. You know, but Glenn, you know, Glenn's vocal approach and everything, you know, Glenn's an icon. You know, he's iconic, and
definitely,
you know, there's a reason for that. It wasn't, you know, by mistake or, you know, by chance. You know, it's just, you know, he's got that, you know, that it factor that, you know, this guy's legendary. You know, now, you know, 2023, you know, he's still at it, and he's still crushing it.
Yeah, and, I'm impressed. They're playing in LA with Suicidal Tendencies and someone else pretty soon, and I was just like, man,
yeah, that's what, like in a week and a half or something like that.
Yeah,
2 weeks. Yeah. They were here. They started the tour here in Dallas, and I was out of town with Quiet Riot. I couldn't go, and my wife went. You know, she said it was great. You know, she went there, saw everybody, and, you know, say hello. Yeah, that was always like, you know, like that was always the thing that, you know, to keep in mind, you know, when I was playing in Danzig, you know, I played in Danzig for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And it was, you know, like it wasn't so much, you know, like the things, you know, like it was like trying to find, like, you know, like the little nuances in the song and stuff like that. But it was having respect for everybody that came before you. You know, like you had to have respect for the song and what was there, and, you know, like there's those things, you know, like the parts of those songs that make them iconic, make them great, make them stand the test of time. And you can't just go in there and, like, you know, well, you know, I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah.
You know, I hear it differently.
It's not going to work.
Yeah. Which is kind of, you know, which is also, you know, like, you know, a lot of my career has been, you know, like, you know, covering, you know, other, you know, replacing other people.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm doing it with Quiet Riot too. You can't just go in there and, like, well, you know what, I'm gonna do it this way, you know, now, you know, granted, you know, yeah, you know, iconic song. Yeah. Right. Got it. No problem. We're going to take care of this. You know, we're going to do it the Johnny Kelly way now, you know, Johnny Kelly 2023, watch out, you know.
You can put your own little flavor into it too without completely.
Yeah, I mean, but, like, you know, like there's certain things, you know, like as a player, you know, you can, you know, you can try to recreate what somebody did, but you're never going to play it the way that they did, you know. So you just try to have respect for what they did and try to, you know, like get that part to come across in what you're playing. without like completely, losing your identity and your own character.
Yeah.
So I was trying to find, like that balance in it. And Danzig's music is, it is challenging. And, like, and if, people may think otherwise, but they're, grossly mistaken, so.
It's legendary
But it
stuff.
was a lot of fun.
Let's talk about I Am. Talk about how you guys got together and what's going on right now. I know that I love the single Dreams Always Die with the Sun. I'm looking forward to hearing a full-length record, but you guys got a lot going on with that. So
that started with the head of the CEO of Corpse Paint Records, Andrew Spalding. He Drew used to work. I met Drew. He was the merchandiser for Danzig.
Okay.
He was the merch guy.
It all comes together.
Yeah. And Kenny was doing that tour. Kenny was also playing for Danzig on that tour. And we became friends. And then when Type O went on tour, we had Drew come and do merch for Type O. And so then Drew was like family. Like Drew and I, we've taken our families to Disney together. That's
awesome.
Yeah. So Drew was, he wanted to start a small record label. And it was his idea to put me and Kenny together with Kirk and Todd.
Did you guys know them before this?
I knew Kirk and Todd, for years. I met Kirk when I had just joined Type O, and I think I went to go see Pantera at the Roseland, and Crowbar was opening up, and I met Kirk then, so I've been friends with Kirk for 30 years. The same thing with Todd. And, then, every time our paths would cross, like if, Type O was playing nearby, Kirk always came out, we saw him play with Down a bunch of times, saw him play with Crowbar. And, but like it never really crossed my mind that I would wind up, playing with him in any, like in anything. I never really thought about it that way, but when Drew was living in New Orleans, he became friends with all the Crowbar guys and stuff. And he was always hanging out with Kirk. And then Drew came up with the idea to to put us together. And, we were all into it. We were like, yeah, this could be fun.
It works really well.
Who knows what's going to come of it? We had no idea. I literally had no idea because nobody was telling me anything, because they were, like, we had made arrangements, we had made plans to go to Florida to record Dreams Always Die with the Sun. And I had asked the guys, I was like, hey, if anybody want to send me an MP3 of what you guys have been working on, something so I could get a couple of ideas before I get there. They're like, no, it's cool. Don't worry about it. Kirk likes to write in the studio, and Kenny didn't send me anything. And so when I got to the studio, like Drew picked me up from the airport. We went to the rehearsal studio, and, put my suitcase in the corner, and I started setting up the kit. And then they started playing what they had been working on. They were playing it to me, starting to get ideas. And then, by the end of that rehearsal, we had an arrangement and stuff, and, some definite ideas. The next day we went and recorded it. And, but we got the drums done, and then I had to leave. I came in, did the drums, and I really wasn't sure what the record was going to sound like. Like Kenny was singing a couple of things at rehearsal, just like melody lines, trying to find something, in the song as we're, working it out. And so I really had no idea what to expect as far as the song itself when it was done. I just knew a couple of riffs and the arrangement of the riffs, and I wasn't sure 100%, like, what's going to be the chorus? Is this the verse? Is it, what is this? What's going on? Because there's no vocals. I don't know anything. So then it was like, all right, this is going to be the verse. This will be the chorus, whatever. Do the key change, like whatever is calling it. All right, the Kirk part goes here, and blah, blah, And then, a couple of weeks later, then I got, rough mixes of what was done, and I was like, oh shit, there it is. There's the song, and it was cool. Like I was pleasantly surprised.
I woke up singing that hook at the end, the breakdown riff, the dreams always die with the sun part, and I always know, I'm like, if I hear a song a couple times and I remember that hook, I'm like, that's a good hook. So
it wound up like like everybody worked really well together, and more importantly, it was a lot of fun. I mean, I was kind of nervous at first about how Kirk and Todd would respond to the way Kenny and I work together. Because like us, the way that we talk to each other, it's an abusive relationship.
You guys have been doing it for a long time.
Yeah, and there's never any sugarcoating or like, hey, that was good, buddy. Like you can do better. Like there's no sugarcoating anything. Like it really like. Very abusive to each other, but that's how we communicate.
It's funny because I find that I get along well with East Coast people for that reason. And I always use this analogy. When I played in a band, I would go to my friends at work and be like, yo, my band's playing tonight. Come on out. And the LA people would be like, yeah, I'll totally be there. And they wouldn't show up. But my East Coast friends would go, fuck your band. I hate your band. You guys fucking suck. Let's get a beer later. And I always appreciated that. I'm like, I appreciate that honesty,
like that's like a lot of times, like when I play in New York, I'd be like, hey, whatever, playing with Danzig at Roseland, they'd be like, oh, dude, that's a Wednesday.
I ain't driving out after I get off work. Fuck that. Like
It's like, do you have anybody for the list in your hometown? No. It's like nobody wants to come.
I love it.
Yeah, they're like, oh, I'll see you when you come back on a weekend,
Maybe next time.
Yeah. And also, like, after doing it for so many years, they're like, we've seen the show, we know you're playing Danzig. That's great. We'll see you next week. See you when you get home.
Yeah. They're not enamored with it. They're not.
No, they're over it.
Like, you got other people supporting you now. Like, we don't.
You don't need me there. We're not even going to talk that much. That's
Before we move on to the Kill Devil Hill stuff, these guys are talking in the comments about a contest that you guys are doing.
I'm not wearing my glasses, so I can't.
It's okay. No, you don't have to read it.
Oh, no, I can see the comments. Tell
okay.
everyone about I Am Contest. Spend the day with Kenny and Johnny. Now, this was one of those things that I was the last to find out. I found out on the internet. But we're doing.
Well, you guys are renting me out. What?
We're doing a contest. I think it's on like to hang out with us on Halloween.
That's cool.
To like spend the day in the studio with us and hang out and watch all the magic happen. That person's going to be doing Starbucks runs.
It's funny. I always put on the Bloody Kisses record on Halloween. I usually put it on and just blast it with the windows open. So
yeah,
seems like Typo Negative guys on Halloween would be cool.
It does go hand in hand together.
You can make them answer the door for trick or treaters at your place or something.
We would, but like I would never, like I haven't dressed up for Halloween in like I don't know, like 20 years and stuff. Yeah. Like the thing that kind of sucked about it was it was great because Typo would always play on Halloween, and it was always an event. Like for years we played at the Trocadero in Philadelphia. We play on Halloween. We did it like 5 years in a row where we played on Halloween night. And that became a thing, and it became this big thing, like Typo going out on Halloween. They went hand in hand together, Typo and Halloween.
I feel like in LA, Halloween is like bigger than Christmas. Like they have a parade, and it's like
Christmas, like California. There really is no sense of family in California. Everybody's transients. They're all their families are all in the Midwest.
But there is a lot of Latino people, and Latin people have very strong.
Yeah, they have strong family ties.
I will give that. Maybe not us white folks, but anymore.
No, but like music industry people, they're not.
Yeah,
they don't have family. in LA.
Well, in Hollywood itself, let's be honest, a lot of Hollywood is Jewish, so they don't even celebrate Christmas. They're doing Hanukkah.
But I noticed that my ex-wife was from LA, and it didn't, it didn't have that same the family oriented, holiday,
Yeah, it's
and
crazy
it,
because I think the Hollywood portion maybe
mm,
but like if you get outside into the city, it's such a vast city and there's so many different, just like New York, there's a bunch of different like areas, and it's different
yeah.
everywhere you go. I feel like Orange County is like almost like politically the polar opposite of, it's the same of Hollywood, even though it's the same.
Behind the orange curtain.
Everyone's at the same income bracket, but
Yeah.
politics are different.
Yeah. But like the takeaway from it was like, like when my daughter was born, and like we all started having kids, and it's like we missed all these Halloweens because we were always away. So it's like you take your kids out, like, trick-or-treating, and even now, like, it feels weird to be home on a Halloween.
Yeah.
Like, because for like, there's
guys
been a
always
few
play
years,
shows.
like, now, like since the pandemic, even with Danzig, like, we always played on Halloween, like if it wasn't Typo, it was Danzig, it was always away for Halloween.
Yeah.
And since then, since the pandemic began, it's like, been home every year for Halloween, and
Well, you guys got to do an I Am Halloween show.
well now we have something going on for, we're doing the contest. I don't think we'll be doing any shows anytime soon because we need more material.
Yeah.
But to me, this is kind of like an interesting, it's like a science project almost, to see, I guess we're approaching it in a different way of releasing music. And, so I'm finding that interesting to see if this is something that's, that's doable. Something that's successful in that sense, because I don't even know if we're gonna again, there hasn't been many discussions about it, but floated around ideas of doing EPs, or just releasing singles, or are we gonna hold all of it and then put it out as one record or something. I don't know. So
it seems like a lot of bands are doing the thing where they build up to the album, or they're just releasing a single and then doing a couple dates, release a single, which I understand in today's climate.
But that's what we've been doing with Kill Devil Hill, for like the last
good
few
transition.
Months. Been doing put out a single, put out a video, and then, maybe a month and a half later, another, 6 weeks, we do another video with like a lyric video or something, like just slowly introducing, like the album, to everybody, leading up to the release of the full length. But that's going to be a full length record. So that's, that was decided that,
I actually listened to it and wrote a review of it. And I talked to Mark a couple weeks ago even, and it's great stuff. Very high quality, great music, 15 songs. It's a long record too.
It's a lot. Yeah, we did a lot of recording in a short amount of time. I did all the drums in 2.5 days.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
that is quick.
But it wasn't like it wasn't the goal. It wasn't like, oh, we got to get all this done in 2.5 days. It was just happened. I was only there for a short amount of time, and we were just like, let's see what we can get done. And Chris Collier was producing it, so when he was happy with what we had, then we would move on. And a couple of days later, it was like, how many songs have we recorded? Because I'm just sitting in there playing, sitting in the room just playing for hours.
Yeah,
it's like where are we at?
The quality of the music, I think, makes it evident that, excuse me, that you guys are all vets. Like everyone in the band is a veteran of the industry to some degree.
The band is lucky in the sense that, Zavon there's no shortage of riffs with him, he can come up with something, instantly.
Yeah.
So, so he got on a good run there where they came up with a lot of stuff. And then when it was, when they were, when we were talking about, recording new music and stuff, because it all happened, pretty casually, because we hadn't played together in a long time, the band didn't do anything for literally years. And so then we were talking about maybe working on some new music. So it's like, send me some, I told him, I was like, send me some stuff. I'll do some drum tracks here at home, do some demos. And see what comes of it. It was just, there was no label and no management, nothing like that. We were just working on new music, and to see what came of it, see how it went. And then it was like, the songs were really good. They were pretty cool songs. And we were like, wow, the songs are really good. And then we were like, then it was decided, we're going to record, we're going to, make better recordings of this. We're going to put, try to put a record out. And then we found the label, and then from there, then it was, everything's been moving pretty quickly since I heard the masters. It's been,
Yeah, it sounds great. You guys are playing out here this month, right?
Yeah, the band's got some shows in September. LA, I think. LA, Vegas. I forget where the other one is. But they're to coincide with the release of the record and stuff.
So Seas of Oblivion is the name of the record. It comes out September 27th. Is that right?
Is it? I think it's the 20th.
Or the 20th. My bad. Yeah, Rick, it's in the comments. 20th, September 20th.
Yeah. So that it'll be cool. Like I'm really proud of the record. It was really cool. Like group effort. It was cool seeing watching how quickly it came together. It's just like, when it finally was decided, this is, we're going to do this. And then it was like bang, 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 bang. I was like, holy shit, it's done already. Like the vocals took a long time. It was like, like making time with like Chris Collier, to get stuff like that. Mark had surgery on his hand, so he was out of commission. He was waiting for to do his solos. All the basic tracks were done for a long time. Then it was a matter of getting those things, the vocals.
Surgery on his hand? That's crazy.
Yeah, surgery. Yeah, he was having a hard time. It wasn't carpal tunnel. What was it? I forget. Even that was like a long time ago now.
Yeah,
but it put him out of commission for a few months, and then he recovered, and then it was just solos are done. All the solos are done. Once he was able to play again, it was just that's it. Which was great. So that was it was cool that way to see, and I was really happy with the end result, because even our demos that we did and stuff. I've been saying this a lot, and it's part of for me, learning, about songwriting and, creating, trying to put, drums to, to a song. And it's a lot easier when I see see the big picture, get a really strong idea of what the song is, instead of, when you're starting from scratch, you're just putting patterns to, riffs and stuff, but you're not really sure. You're not really sure what the song is saying yet. So it's hard to, come up with the perfect thing right away. Be like, that's it, song's done.
Yeah.
And so it's, you always hear it. Like I'm always like the last to hear it, right now the vocals are done and, all this stuff. And be like, well, I could have done something different there. I could have done something, something that maybe, didn't overplay it too much, or, could have pulled back a little bit, or, whatever, just to create that dynamic. And, but everybody was really happy with the final results. And it was, it was a cool experience all around. It was great to work with a different producer, from a different environment, and, get that kind of perspective on, how they produce, and how they get stuff out of you and stuff. And it was, it was cool. Taking the, suggestions that they were giving me, and it'd be like, well, I didn't really, never would have thought of it like that. Or, I wouldn't have approached it that way.
Yeah.
Hey, that's why they're here.
Sometimes you need that outside perspective.
Yeah,
the record sounds
set of ears, because you get too, you can either be you get too attached to something, you're too involved in it, or you're you're completely oblivious to what's going on around you, and then you need somebody to say, this is what you need to do here.
Totally. I had an opportunity recently to mix some demos I made when I was 17. The guy saved this stuff on digital tape. So I was listening to these songs. I'm going back through it and I'm like, this is way too long. Like, why did we play this part for like 12 minutes? Like, we could cut this down. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
now older me is looking back at it, like younger me would have been like, no, fuck you. That's how the song goes. You know?
Don't fuck with my art.
Yeah, I'm an artist, man. But older me is like, man, people are going to be bored with this. Like, there's this droning part for like 20 minutes that doesn't need to be here.
But that comes like those kind of things. You only get that from experience.
Yep. You know, or from an outside perspective.
Yeah. Which is their experience.
Yeah. He's like, I've worked with 1,000 different bands, buddy. Let me show you.
So it was cool that way to to get that, gain that different perspective. So yeah, I took it as a great learning opportunity.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's start wrapping things up. What do you got outside of, you got shows coming up here at the Whiskey in September, in September 21st, I believe.
Yeah.
And then
21st.
The record comes out the 20th, the Kill Devil Hill record. Yeah. There's a new I Am single slated too.
Yeah, November. Cryptomnesia.
Yeah.
I can't.
Cryptomnesia. It's funny because I thought that was a nonsense word. And then Kenny, I asked Kenny about it and he pronounced it. And I was like, that's why I asked you, because it's great though. Yeah. It's perfect.
So that's coming out. That's coming out in November. I have a Patriarchs in Black record coming out in October. I forget the date. We just put something on Bandcamp like 2 weeks ago, and it has a DMC on it. DMC guested on the song. What else? Got a bunch of Quiet Riot dates coming up, playing all over the place.
Actually, my cousin is a photographer who I run this with. He's based in Salt Lake, so he may want to come see you guys and take some photos.
Oh, okay. Right. We're going to be in Salt Lake in a couple of weeks. Like,
I'll talk to Raquel about it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. We're playing.
And I'll definitely see you at the Kill Devil Hill show at the Whiskey.
Okay. I'm trying to think what else is going on.
You got a lot on your plate, man.
It is, but it isn't.
Yeah.
We're going to at the end of October. I'm going back to New Orleans with the I Am guys. We're going to do another session,
awesome.
Writing sessions. Hopefully come up with a few more songs and stuff.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hear more stuff from you guys because I really dig that single. And
I would love to tell you what they sound like, but I have no idea, and I won't. Nobody will give me anything until I get there. Yeah.
Man, that sucks because I feel like the drummer is part. Like once you hear the completed song, like the drummer adds those transitions and stuff. Like the energy builds, and it's like maybe they need to like finish the song and then let you retrack drums or something.
Well, a lot of times that's how I get a lot of music done. They'll just send me like a track to guitar, a rough guitar track, play to a click, and then here, put drums to this.
Yeah. Well,
but it's so like we'll all be in the room together, so it's like we throw ideas off of each other, and it's like you can get. Like they can explain, like what they're trying to go for in a certain part. And then at least you get a little bit more input than just a scratch guitar track, which is just a bunch of riffs and, whatever. And you try to, put the puzzle together that way. But, so anyway, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun, spend like a week in New Orleans in the fall should be pretty cool.
Awesome. Well, come back and talk to me again when you guys are done.
Yeah, for sure, man. Thanks.
This has been fun, man. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah.
And, anyway, thanks for having me on.
It's an honor, man.
All right.
Thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
I'll see you soon. Thanks again.
Take care, Johnny.
Bye, guys. In the chat. Bye.
Did we forget any? We didn't forget anything, right? September 20th, the Kill Devil Hill record. September 21st of the Whiskey. We got, we covered everything.
Single coming out with I Am. There's we have what is it? 30th anniversary and 20th anniversary. Bloody Kisses and Life is Killing Me. Versions coming out.
Let's definitely do an October Rust thing next year too with you and Kenny.
Sure.
I mean, it's a year out, but hey, let's put it on the calendar now.
I think we can find time.
Yeah. Well, I thank you so much, Johnny.
Hey, thanks again.
It's an honor to talk to you, man. I've been a fan of you guys' music for a long time, so I appreciate your time.
I appreciate it. Have a good one.
We'll see you soon.
Bye.
All right. That was awesome. Johnny is such a cool dude, and big props to Raquel for making all this possible. And we've been live today on Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube. So go subscribe to our channels and all that good stuff. Tomorrow, we have Maddox Messer from the band Messer. And then next week, we have Scott Mellinger from the band Zao coming in on Monday. And I'm like right on the edge of booking someone from one of my favorite bands right now too. But I can't say it until I nail the time down. So you'll see it when it's posted. But if you're tuning in, thank you for paying attention. We love this. It's been amazing to talk to these bands and kind of see this thing evolve as it has. And we appreciate all y'all tuning in and commenting and interacting and all that stuff. Keep doing that. And we love y'all. Have a great one. I'm going to get out of here now.